It's not so grim up north. Some of the loveliest, funniest people in the UK are northern. And that's where all the factory jobs were when my parents came here in the 1950s from the West Indies. The jobs were dangerous and badly paid, but you didn't even need an interview. You just turned up in the morning and you'd lost a finger by the afternoon. While the other kids besieged Santa for the latest must-have toy, a scale electric racing car set, a Hornby train set, or, best of all, a Johnny 7 multi-purpose machine gun, all I wanted was to be a fifth Beatle. But someone beat me to the punch. There really was a fifth Beatle, and he was brilliant. He's often relegated to a kind of novelty footnote in Beatle biographies. Even in a wonderful 1974 musical about the Beatles called John, Paul, George, Ringo and Bert by Willie Russell, he's not really mentioned at all, even though the whole musical is built around a fantasy Beatle. Yet the real fifth Beatle may have contributed to the Beatles staying together for another year, 2 years, to give us two great more albums, Let It Be and Abbey Road. By 1969, the Beatles' recording session had grown so volatile, so petty, that all hell broke loose when Yoko Ono just reached over and took one of George's digestive biscuits without permission. The same thing happened again when she sat on his amp. Another genial presence was needed to calm things down. They needed a fifth Beatle. Now, every Beatle fan knows there are several nominees for this role. There's Brian Epstein, the Beatles manager, there's George Martin, the Beatles producer, there's Eric Clapton, who played on While My Guitar Gently Weeps, then ran off with George Harrison's wife. But the fifth Beatle that actually got a name check on the singles Get Back and the flip side, Don't Let Me Down, was none other than Billy Preston. Just who was Billy Preston? How did he get to spend so much quality time with the Beatles? How did he get to record over 8 songs with the world's biggest rock band? How comes Billy Preston made such a good impression that Fab Four discussed making him a permanent member of the band? George Martin also welcomed his presence, and Billy joined the Beatles on stage for their last live performance. Billy Preston was a keyboard genius, a musician's musician. I mean, if Miles Davis has a track on his Get Up With It album called Billy Preston, yes, that Miles Davis, that's the musical equivalent of Nelson Mandela coming round to your place for some advice on ethics. But despite Billy Preston's affable presence, he was troubled for reasons beyond his control and his comprehension. William Everett Preston was born on the 2nd of September 1946 in Houston, Texas. His childhood was violently interrupted by a sexual assault. He told his mother, with whom he had an otherwise wonderful relationship, remained in denial till her death. As Billy matured into his teens, he knew he was gay. Homosexuality was still illegal and frowned upon by his religion. Also, his formative years were spent in the racially segregated states. The only place that Billy found comfort and solace was in the church, playing the organ, which he excelled at. By 10 years old, he was doing TV shows with Nat King Cole. Later that year, he played organ for Mahalia Jackson. His first album was produced by Sam Cooke called 16-Year-Old Soul. I keep feeling I have to say, yes, that Nat King Cole. Yes, that Mahalia Jackson. Yes, that Sam Cooke. So when Little Richard took the 15-year-old Billy Preston on a European tour in 1962, Billy Preston was already a veteran. It was in this year, in Hamburg, Germany, that Billy Preston met the Beatles for the first time. The unfamous Beatles, as they were the opening act for Little Richard. The Beatles, especially Paul, were obsessed with Little Richard. Paul did such a good impression of Little Richard that when I first heard Little Richard, I wondered why he was impersonating Paul McCartney. That woo sound that the Beatles used to make in the early days was actually borrowed from Little Richard. There's a great tour bus story that the Beatles demonstrated to Little Richard that when their song reaches a crescendo, they're going to shake their heads and their heart and make that whooping sound. Little Richard was reported to have fallen out laughing, but the Beatles understood their audience and became an early trademark. Billy would always watch the Beatles from the wings. He was particularly impressed with the Beatles' harmonies. George Harrison asked Billy to join them on stage to play the organ, but Billy was afraid that little Richard, the star of the show, would get mad at his disloyalty. So they went their separate ways, and of course the Beatles became mega. In 1969, George Harrison left the Beatles because he couldn't take the tension in the studio anymore. While playing hooky, he went to see Ray Charles in London. He recognised Billy and invited him back to the Let It Be sessions on the 22nd of January 1969. The Beatles and Billy Preston jammed and reminisced. Billy Preston got the impression that John Lennon was definitely the head Beatle. John invited Billy to stay over to help them finish the Let It Be album. John even invited Billy to become a permanent member of the Beatles. Paul was not so keen. He knew the Beatles were breaking up, it just wasn't official yet. Between the 22nd of January to the 15th of August 1969, Billy Preston is credited as playing electric organ and electric piano on 8 Beatle tracks including Get Back, Don't Let Me Down, Let It Be and Something. Preston also performed with the Beatles during their 42-minute performance on the rooftop of Apple on the 30th of January 1969, which was the band's final public performance. Well, surely things couldn't get much better than this. Actually, it could. When the Beatles finally did split, Preston was signed to the Beatles' Apple recording label. Billy Preston had hits with That's the Way God Planned It and Encouraging Words. And how about this for a house band? George Harrison produced, Eric Clapton on guitar, Ginger Baker on drums, Keith Richards on bass. Preston would have several more hits including the #1 Outer Space and the 1974 You Are So Beautiful, written for his mother. But it's more as a sideman that really he remained familiar. Preston went on to play individually with John Lennon, Ringo Starr, George Harrison, Eric Clapton, and performed and toured on 5 Rolling Stone albums, 1971 to 1977. Except for a slight mishap at a Rolling Stone concert where Billy fell off the stage and his afro hair was revealed to be a wig, Billy described his Beatle years as the happiest of his life. He said when all 4 Beatles were in a room together there was a sort of glow. This mirrors something George Martin said when he first auditioned the Beatles. In truth, he was a little underwhelmed with their musicianship, but he said that when they left the room there was a chill, there was something definitely missing. Freud said the cornerstone of all neuroses are secrets, especially sexual ones. Billy never officially came out, although it was common knowledge among fellow musicians. He was never ashamed of his sexuality, but it couldn't have been easy being a black gay man in the church. What may have been causing his nightmares was the unresolved sexual abuse of his childhood. The excessive self-medication with drugs and alcohol eventually took its toll. On June the 6th, 2006, Billy Preston, the consummate musician, passed away at the age of 59 years old. At this point we're meant to say the sad ending of Billy Preston, but this guy lived enough lives for 4. His career spanned 5 decades. When I listen to his version of My Sweet Lord and his solo gospel records, I almost become religious. He was a great man, and for at least 1 year of his life, he really could have claimed to have been the 5th Beatle.